Hey there, I'm Brittany Smith, and welcome to Filmmaker Symposium. So today we're going to talk about story structure, why it's important, and what it actually is. So first off, I think before we start this discussion, I want to talk about creativity in general. With every single creative endeavor, you have to have some sort of structure before you get started. I like to think about recipes, so like culinary art. So I'm not one to use recipes. I hate using recipes. It just feels confining. But that doesn't mean that I don't have structure when I'm cooking. So for instance, if I'm making cookies, I know that I need something to make it stick together, which would be eggs. And then I know I need something to make it rise a little bit, which would be baking powder or baking soda. And then I know I need something sweet, so I'm going to have sugar or honey or maple syrup, whatever you're doing with your recipe. But essentially, I'm not using a recipe, but I do have structure to the way I'm cooking or baking. And this gives me license to create all sorts of things and use different ingredients, but still have that same solid foundation of a structure. The same applies to filmmaking and storytelling. You have to have a structure, a basis that you go off of in order to create a story. Structure is what gives your story energy, it's what gives it beauty, it's what gives it emotion and brings it to life. So structure is absolutely necessary for all stories. Now, a lot of Christians, when they make a film, they just chuck structure right out the window. They might use a recipe in the sense that they read a book and it showed them every single step that they're supposed to do before making a movie, but they don't have the structure in the sense of creating energy in the film and creating interest from the audience. So structure is key for creating a really good story. So what exactly is story structure? So story structure is when you take life events from a character's life and you put them in a specific order in order to create a certain emotion or a viewpoint or to send a certain message across. Now, this can be any number of events and you can switch them around to create different emotions or a different viewpoint or send a different message. Or you could have bad story structure where you're including events that really don't matter in your story and they kind of throw your story off track. So let's take Red Riding Hood for an example. I think most of us understand the story of Red Riding Hood, but let's say after she talks to the wolf and tells him where she's going, she goes and picks flowers, like in the story, but let's say she gets stung by a bee. So she gets stung by a bee and she starts crying. She runs home, her mother fixes her little wound and puts a bandage on it, and then she goes to her grandmother's house. That particular scene or event really doesn't help the story at all. I mean, how does it speak to the message of the story? The message of a story is don't be naive and don't believe everyone and make friends with everyone that you know. Be careful with strangers. Being stung by a bee has nothing to do with that. So while Red Riding Hood could have certainly been stung by a bee, that's not an impossibility, but that story event doesn't make any sense in the light of the message of the story. So if you're including story events in your filmmaking or your screenwriting that's just throwing your audience off track, you're going to lose your audience very quickly because they're going to be like, okay, this is not making sense and I can't follow this story because she's being stung by a bee. And they're not consciously thinking that, but your audience is going to be judging the movie subconsciously. So you want to make sure that your story structure has a string of events that are going on that make sense and point to the message of your story. So now that we've talked about story structure from a holistic perspective, kind of from a broad viewpoint, now I want to dig a little bit deeper into what a story event is. So a story event is a change that happens to a character or by a character that changes the state or condition of that character. Now that seems like a mouthful, so I'm going to kind of break it down a little bit. Let's take Red Riding Hood for an example again. So in Red Riding Hood, we have her skipping down the lane and she's having a grand old time. And then the big bad wolf comes and starts talking with her and she gives away where she's going. So this is the story event. She was safe. She was skipping down the lane and the wolf didn't really know where she was going. She was considerably safe. Then when she told the wolf where she was going, now he's scheming and there is a change in her condition and state. So she went from being safe to unsafe. And this is really important because let's say we had poor story structure with this particular event. So with poor story structure, we would have Red Riding Hood skipping down the lane, and then you have the big bad wolf come, and when they come in contact with each other, he says, "Top of the morning to you," and she goes, "Top of the morning to you." And then they both go on their merry way. Now, you might think that this is an obvious thing, like, I wouldn't write a scene like that, but you might be surprised at how many beginners will actually do this, because they're trying to describe who their character is, so they have all these scenes that really don't mean anything. It's just blah, it's like nothingness. It says nothing about the story. So it's super important in Red Riding Hood that there is a change. Now this change has to be either positive to negative or negative to positive. You can't have positive to positive or negative to negative because you're going to bore your audience. So in my example of a bad story event where Red Riding Hood just, passes by the wolf and they say hi to each other, that is an example of going from positive to positive, because Red Riding Hood is in a state of safety, and then after her contact with the wolf, she's still safe, which is really boring. That doesn't do anything for the story. It doesn't move it forward. It's just expository. It's just description. It's just maybe showing you that Red Riding Hood is a nice person and that maybe the wolf is portraying himself to be nice, and later on we're going to reveal that he's deceptive. So you want to make sure that every story event has a change, because we don't want to know every single detail about a character. We want to see that character revealed through the events. Well, that's all I've got for today, but next time we'll be talking more about scenes and beats and maybe a few other things. So don't miss it. Be sure to subscribe so that you get the notification when the movie comes through. Now, if you're wanting to dig a little bit deeper than what we're doing on this video series, then you can go ahead and buy a book that I highly recommend. This is called Story by Robert McKee, and it's just been a great resource as I'm studying more about storytelling and screenwriting, and you'll reference it for years to come. I've listened to it a few times on audiobook, and I finally bought the book because I just needed it in my hands, which I think you'll enjoy as well. So thanks for watching today, and I'll see you next time on Filmmaker Symposium.